Hey everybody, welcome to One Mind Brainwaves. I'm Lori Hernandez, guest hosting for Brandon Staglin this week. In this most challenging year, people have turned to the arts for comfort, familiarity, and joy to help them cope, even to survive. But with Broadway and other theaters around the country shuttered, performances and concerts canceled, art museums closed, we've had to get, pretty creative, discovering new ways to view, hear, and make art for the most part right in our own homes. Thankfully, I am one to play instruments and just play around with that since I've been a little kid, and it's been something that I've loved to dive into, especially this year with the time that we've had. And in a few minutes, we're going to hear about the intersection of brain science and the arts, how our response to experiencing art can improve mental health and well-being. It's the reason we like to open every Brainwaves with a performance, and today is no different. We are so honored to have him here and thrilled to welcome a folk music legend, teacher, author, singer-songwriter, Happy Traum. Hey, yo, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for speaking with me today.
Absolutely.
Your history is just amazing. For over 5 decades, you have been collaborating and recording with so many great artists, including your late brother Artie and your pal Bob Dylan. But let's start at the beginning. Greenwich Village in the 50s and 60s. In fact, your first time in a recording studio was a historic session. Is that correct?
That's right. I grew up in New York City and was lucky enough to have been inspired and had my mind blown open by Pete Seeger when I was about 16 years old. And I just got into the New York folk scene in Greenwich Village really early on. And as you mentioned, the first recording session I was ever in, I was in a group called the New World Singers, which was a quartet at the time. And we were friends with a very young, very new to the scene, Bob Dylan, who was just starting to write songs. And the lead singer in our group, a guy named Gil Turner, was a good friend of Bob's at the time. And Bob taught him this brand new song that he had written called Blowing in the Wind. And we went into a studio at Folkways Records in Midtown Manhattan. And in that studio, and I don't know, it's a long time ago, so some of these names might not be familiar, but there was Pete Seeger, Bob Dylan, Phil Oakes, um, the Freedom Singers, a group from Albany, Georgia, who were really pivotal in the singing part of the civil rights movement, and several other folk performers and singer-songwriters who were around at that time. So my immersion into this as a recording artist was pretty intense. And I did a duet with Bob Dylan on that record, and we were the first ones to record Blowing in the Wind at that session. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I'm getting giddy just from listening to you. So eventually you landed in Woodstock, New York, where you still live now.
That's
And
right.
for nearly as long as you've been a musician, your company, Homespun Music, has been providing music lessons to people around the world, which is wonderful. What has been the feedback from your students about the therapeutic effects of music?
We since we started, of course, we started very small. Back in '67 was our first foray into. In those days, it was reel-to-reel tape, and our company was called Homespun Tapes because we were mostly doing tapes and then cassettes. Nowadays, nobody knows what a tape is, so we've changed it to Homespun Music Instruction. But starting out with just a few reel-to-reel tapes that I made myself on a little home tape recorder, by now we have over 600 lessons by a whole variety of artists, some of whom are world famous. And of course, it's mostly downloadable now, no tapes anywhere in the process. But we've sold these lessons to people all over the world. And among the feedbacks we get are people who write to us and tell us how just being able to play an instrument, being able to, if they're starting out or already can play, whether it's a guitar, banjo, piano, harmonica, whatever they're playing, we have lessons for them. And they tell us how much it's uplifted their lives. It's given them focus. It's given them a meaning that they hadn't necessarily had before. We also have quite a number of blind students. We call them our students. They're customers, but we call them our students. And because many of our lessons are audio only, we get a lot of people from the blind community who have been working with our music lessons. In fact, for a long time, the Library of Congress Division of the Blind and Physically Handicapped were one of our biggest public customers. So, I think it's very meaningful to have these things for people, both from just a psychological point of view, giving people a focus, giving them an art that they can work out on their own and feel fulfilled, just even if it's just in their house by themselves. We don't necessarily have to have people performing on a stage to play this music. And that's the beauty of it. It's kind of living room music, porch music, whatever you'd want to call it, but it's the kind of music that people can do at home. And so I think it's really meaningful to many people.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who has kind of just dipped my toe in the water with songwriting and whatnot, it gives a place just to put all your feelings into art form, which is, of course, that's the topic of today. And I don't mean for it to be cliche, but to be able to put that in somewhere, and music gives it a whole other dimension, which is just, it's beautiful. So to know that you have just an array of students, it warms my heart. And I think it'll warm everybody who's listening as well. Unfortunately, with almost 300,000 deaths in America due to COVID, it has driven home the mental health impacts for survivors. When you lost your brother Artie, how did you want to keep performing? And was performing music part of coping with the loss?
One of the big challenges right now for the last almost year has been that the people who get out and play for other people can't do it. The gigs have just dried up. You don't want to be in a room with a lot of people, and you can't be. And even recording studios are, not, unless you're going by ones and twos, it's not the best idea. So I feel very fortunate that I can be at home and make lessons for people just the way I'm talking to you and disseminate them out, and lots of people that have been stuck at home and just dying for something to do have been tuning into our lessons. So that part of it is very gratifying. But the many friends I have who rely on going out and playing gigs at, whether it's bars or coffee houses or concert halls or even stadiums, whatever level they're at, they can't do it right now. And it's very it's for those people who are creative beings and they live for communicating with others, unless they can do it online in some way, which of course people are doing a lot. But it's a very trying situation for many people. And I'm just hoping that the next few months, with the vaccine coming and everything else, that it'll loosen up and let people get together again and play music together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Laura?
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
I wanted to just jump in to say, don't you think, Happy, it will be glorious when we can all get together and come out? I mean, I think, I just can't imagine the joy of people being able to really connect with each other and hear live music again. I'm not an artist, I'm not a singer, or I don't play an instrument. And when I do hear live music, it just opens my soul. And so I'm really excited about that too.
Yeah, I think that's been missing for the last year and probably will be for the next few months still, maybe until the middle of next year. But that is one of the joys of, whether it's getting together with two or three people in a living room and playing together, or in a big concert hall, that experience of playing music and listening to music is a very vital one. And it does bring people's minds and hearts into a common place. And what I learned all those years ago when I was a teenager from Pete Seeger, he was the guy who could just stand all by himself on a stage with his banjo and get 1,500 or so people singing together in harmony. And I try to do that as much as I can too.
I just want to thank both of you for sharing that, because I know that feeling of live music. It just feels like you're in another like parallel universe. It's completely separate than where you're at now. And I share that feeling of being excited for that to come back too. So When I Paint My Masterpiece was written by your friend Bob Dylan in 1971, and like so many Dylan masterpieces, it's been covered by countless artists.
Mhm.
So can you tell us about the genesis of the song, how it fits into the Dylan repertoire, and why you and your brother loved playing it live?
You know, I think this was one of the songs that was on the famous basement tapes that Bob Dylan and the band put together just as demos in the basement of this house in Woodstock called Big Pink. And the band's first album was called Music for Big Pink. And I was fortunate enough to be friends with those guys from the time they came to Woodstock in around 1968 or so. All through, I mean, sadly, we've lost almost all of them. Now there's 2 of the original 5 left. But I did get to play this song many times with Levon Helm, who was the one who sang it on the band's album, Music for Big Pink, as I remember. I think that's right. And my late brother Artie and I played together for about 40 years, and this was a song we just always had fun with. We love to play it. It's one of those songs that just kind of is an immediate attention grabber. People love it when we sing it. I haven't done it myself very much lately, but you know, it gets into your kind of muscle memory, and you don't forget these things too often. And just like a lot of other Bob Dylan songs, some of the words have changed from one version to the other. There's one line that says, "I got me a date with," originally I think it was Botticelli's niece, and then it became "a pretty little girl from Greece," you know. So I landed in Brussels with a picture of a tall oak tree by my side. And then that morphed into a train ride so bumpy that I almost cried. So, you know, Bob liked to play with words, and his songs were never static. They would change from one day or 1 month or 1 year to the next. So, but it's one of those songs that's just fun to play.
It sounds wonderful. Would you mind sharing with us for a little bit?
I'll do what I can. Let me put my finger picks on here.
So everybody, we're going to get to hear Happy Traum perform When I Paint My Masterpiece.
So this is kind of the way we learned it all many years ago. Oh, the streets of Rome are filled with rubble. Ancient footprints are everywhere. You can almost think that you're seeing double on a cold, dark night on the Spanish stairs. Gotta hurry on back to my hotel room, where I got me a date with Botticelli's niece. She told me that she'd be there with me when I paint my masterpiece. Oh, the hours that we spent inside the Colosseum, dodging lions and wasting time. Oh, those mighty kings of the jungle, I could hardly stand to see them. It sure has been a long, hard climb. Train wheels are running through the back of my memory. Follow me around like a pack of wild geese. Someday it's gonna be different when I paint my masterpiece. Sailing around the in a dirty gondola. Oh, to be back in the land of Coca-Cola. Well, I left Rome and landed in Brussels on a train ride so bumpy that I almost cried. Clergymen in uniform and young girls pulling muscles. Everyone was there to greet me when I stepped outside. Newspaper men eating candy had to be held down by a big police. Someday it's gonna sound like a rhapsody when I paint my masterpiece. When I paint my masterpiece. When I paint my masterpiece.
Oh my goodness. That was definitely a free concert. That was, I mean, I love that so much. Your playing is absolutely beautiful. Happy, thank you so much. Please
Thank you,
have
Lori.
a
I
wonderful
appreciate
holiday
it.
season and come back so we can hear you sing again.
I would love to.
Hey,
Thank you.
can I ask Happy a question?
Yeah, of
Sure.
course.
So Happy, when you're playing, do you feel happy? Like, do you feel the joy in the music, or are you just so in the music that it's everything that you have to just be doing it?
No, I just love to play. I love to play for people, and it's what gives me all my joy.
Yeah,
I
you can feel it.
I feel totally fulfilled when I'm playing and when people are listening. It's really
You resonate that. You know, it's like energy. It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd also like to say that when also a performance artist. When I do my performance work, I work with musicians, and I combine text with music, and it's one of the most fun things that I find that I do. You know, and the music really helps elevate my psyche, so to speak.
Beautiful.
I love that we all kind of
Okay,
connected
thanks
on
for
that.
having me.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. So with me now to discuss the healing power of art, we have Susan Magsamen, is the founder and executive director of the International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And we have Linda Sibio, is an interdisciplinary artist who uses issues surrounding mental health in her work. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia at the age of 18, and today helps teach mentally challenged individuals how to express themselves through art. So Susan and Linda, welcome to Brainwaves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Viewers, don't forget, you can post questions for our guests in the comments section of this webcast at any time you please. Susan, we'll start with you. The mission of your lab is to amplify human potential, and in that effort, you are accelerating the field of neuroaesthetics. So what is neuroaesthetics?
So, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure, and what a gift to have listened to Happy. I'm happy just because of Happy. So thank you. That was wonderful. I didn't know that he would do that song, so that's great. Neuroaesthetics is a huge word, right? But the reality is that it's really about how your brain and body changes on art and aesthetic experience. And that's whether you're the maker or the beholder. So, we change through our sensory systems. We change as the world comes in through us. And the arts in all of her forms, and, we think of them as 10 different art modalities, really allow us to feel the most. And so, we're really interested in that. The built environment is also part of that. So, where you are, whether you're in nature or you're in sort of environments that we have created, we're feeling things all the time. And we're really interested in that intersection of the arts and neuroscience, and how that can make us feel better. So maybe that helps us with our physical or mental health or well-being, or even in learning.
Wow. Through evidence-based science, you've shown that the arts hold remarkable potential for helping treat and manage everything from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's to chronic stress and anxiety. Those are huge topics. How does that work? And would you mind giving us some examples?
Sure. Whoa, right? Like when, you think that's pretty big. I think just to step back for a second, as I said, we know a lot about how our bodies change and how our brains change through sensory experience. Basic science also understands a lot about how neurotransmitters work, how memory works, how motor systems work, how these experiences actually work at a molecular or mechanistic level. And so what has really been interesting is to look at the way this very interdisciplinary field takes basic science and can use that to solve what we think of as pretty intractable problems like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or different types of mental health challenges that we might face, from depression to schizophrenia to addiction and other kinds of things. So I'll just give you a couple of examples, and you don't have to go far to find them. During the pandemic, we saw people outside singing. We saw them connecting to each other, looking at the role of sound and singing for connection and collaboration and community where we were feeling so isolated. In Alzheimer's, we know that autobiographical music can really open someone up and tap into the brain, tap into the hippocampus, and help folks that are suffering with dementia or Alzheimer's remember something about who they were, maybe even remember you for a moment. And while that may not stay, it's those moments that are so amazing. Another example is thinking about Parkinson's and the role of dance and movement to help folks with gait. And so during the pandemic, there's a group called Parkinson's for Dance for PD from the Mark Morris Dance Company. And they are broadcasting all over the world with dance, in essence, dance lessons for people to be able to move who maybe have Parkinson's or stroke or other neurodegenerative issues. And what they're finding is people are dancing more, they're moving better, their mood is increasing, and they in general are happier. And some folks report that where they are now doing it more often, they're finding that their symptoms relief is greater. So we know a lot about how these art forms make us feel better, how the neurotransmitters are working and how the reward system works, and how we think about different aspects in terms of how we embody these work. But the science of this is in some ways very early too. So we're trying to continue to understand things like dosage. How much do you need? How long do you need it? What's the right configuration? So it's very interesting time to be thinking about something that's ancient, right? The arts have been with us forever. And I always say this, that artists have always known the power of these tools. It's really the science that's catching up to the art and trying to add some new knowledge to help, put more wind in the sail in terms of how and when and why and where we can use this work, and how funding and practice and policy changes so that it's more available to folks.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, even in terms of social media, especially with everything that's happened this year, something quite funny actually within the last couple months is that on the social media platform TikTok, a bunch of people have gotten together and took the movie Ratatouille and made a musical out of it. And all these people from around the world started writing different parts of the musical and different songs that could go in. And some people were choreographing dance numbers to it. And it ended up getting published by Playbill as a whole article and links to like Act 1 and Act 2. And people just came together just for fun and did this. And it sparked so much joy on the internet. So everything that you've said, I'm like, okay, I can totally see that. That makes a lot of sense.
And it can be multiplied a million zillion times, right? It can be Ratatouille. It can be Sister Act 2. It can be Dear Evan Hansen. It can be any song. I love the way Happy was talking about how Bob Dylan changed the words to songs because our memories are constantly changing and how we recall is constantly changing. And so to have these acts of creativity together where we're creating new pieces of art from old material, I think it's just fabulous. And there's lots of examples of that. You know, you take your mom's recipe and you make it your way, right? I mean, there's so many sort of acts of art that we do every day. And I think lifting that up and feeling that, whether it's just individually or collectively, and letting other people witness your creativity, I think is very healing and very inspiring.
Yeah, you said a lot of really interesting things, some of which overlap what I do too. My basis for all my exercises is the 4 basic emotions: angry, happy, sad, and frightened, fear. And we use, in order to have healing take place, we go from the feeling to the opposite of the feeling. Okay. And that changes the way people, it teaches people they can control their emotions. And it also changes the way they're thinking about emotional states.
I love that. So can you give us an example of that? I love this idea of the opposite feeling. I think that's so cool.
Okay, well, you know, I give people an exercise where there's a neutral ground. And I also, because it's theater, we give it a name. You know, the person has a name as happy and then a name as angry, okay? And they talk to each other. And the happy person will say it's Susie, and the angry person is Ted. Okay, so Susie will talk to Ted and ask him why he's so angry, and Ted will respond, you know, in an angry way. And we do that until it merges, okay? And then you talk to the person in the neutral place, and both feelings come out simultaneously. So that to me means they've learned how to integrate those feelings, and can, next time they can control, if they're very angry, they can use happiness to control that state.
So it's a balance. It's like a kind of Libra, a scale to help and also regulate those complex emotions.
I believe that in the body, there's no such thing as positive or negative emotions. There's only emotions. And in the body, all those feelings have to be balanced in order for the person to be whole, or in order for the person to communicate to others effectively. You know, a lot of people live in rage and anger, and then that keeps them from having social relationships and things like that. So in the classes, we try to balance those things through performance, writing, and visual art exercises.
So, Linda, from my understanding, you have a family history of mental illness. I'm curious to know how it led to your becoming an artist, and how being an artist intersects with your own mental health challenges.
Well, my mother became ill when I was about 6 years old. And we were in foster homes with our family for about 4 years. And then she committed herself to these hospitals that were around in the 60s in West Virginia and Ohio, Lakin State. You know, that was the worst one. And Huntington State, and all these different hospitals that gave her shock treatments and really bad therapy, too many drugs, you know, and things like that. So I watched my mother disintegrate from being a very beautiful woman to being this wild, uncontrollable person that I didn't know. And I loved my mother very much. So when I went to college, I didn't study psychology, but I would read a lot about especially behavioral psychology on how to change things to communicate with my mother. And one thing I found out was that you couldn't deny her symptoms. That just made her angry. So I would, when she would hallucinate and talk to voices, I would just join in those conversations. And that was from when I was about 10 to 18. I was in an orphanage. So my mother wanted me to be an artist and she cried a lot about it. And I did a silk screen of her and our father on the grass in front of the home we grew up in. And she just wept, And so that's how I became an artist, was because I wanted to make her happy at first. But then I realized that that through the freedom of expression, I could deal with my emotions. And when I was studying painting, and I took up abstract expressionism, even though it wasn't popular at the time, because that way I could paint out my pain and trauma from my youth and, have some space to be able to communicate with others and do social things.
So how does art, or what does art do for the people that you work with and teach? And how does it help them understand and manage their own mental health conditions?
Well, I've had people get over delusions. I've had people, I'll tell you a fun story about a guy on Skid Row. I love teaching on Skid Row because people weren't on medications. But he would always say he had a spaceship. So I gave him an exercise. I says, okay, Joe, you, to your best of your ability, demonstrate to us that you have a spaceship and make us believe it. Okay? And so he went through this whole thing, of how he had a spaceship, and people would ask him questions. Well, where do you keep it? Where is it parked? And during that exercise, he said, well, maybe I don't have a spaceship. So he kind of cut through his own delusion, by that exercise. And then I recently have been teaching an artist who's bipolar, and she has always had trouble with her mania controlling her. And we did, a lot of exercises that dealt with depression and laughter and putting it in the body, taking it out of the mind and putting it into the body. A lot of crying and screaming and things like that. And at one moment she says, I've got it. I have control over my mania. And from that point forward, she did have control of her mania, and she uses it in her work now. So some of the exercises are really simple. Like we start out with an exercise like this. And when the person is doing that sound, they're supposed to look at one point in front of them, just one point. And as they do the sound, they're supposed to inventory where that sound is in their body. Okay? And this usually calms people down. It makes them introspective. And that's how I begin the class. It calms them down and makes them introspective. And then when we do writing exercises, I don't know if you're going to show my artwork, but I gave you a slide of a page from my book that has a chart that is a word salad, but I call it schizophrenic thinking, And it's a chart I use to teach writing where you use multiple subjects. multiple time periods. You can include your delusions, hallucinations, and I have a pattern I ask them to write in. And every time someone writes from that part of the classes, the writing is usually very brilliant and interesting, you know. So it connects, I think, with fragmentation of the brain, which people don't understand when they're listening to a word salad, but the person's actually telling like maybe 10 or 20 different stories in different time periods. And it's hard to understand unless you listen to them for like 4 or 5 hours. And then you begin to understand the stories they're telling. And I know that because I was in the DMV once near a schizophrenic, and it took 2 hours, you know, to get through the line. And I listened to him talk in a word salad that whole time. And that's how I came to know that.
You know, I think that you have provided space for people to share their stories and to listen really carefully is so important, and not always what happens in institutional settings or in some of the mental health programs. But I think that there's such a great, when someone can be heard and be seen and you can start to put that together, it's so important to make those connections, to put those pieces together for people. That's really extraordinary.
Yeah, I've always, the groups I've had, which was Operation Hammer on Skid Row and Cracked Eggs, which I'm doing now with the County of San Bernardino, I'm collaborating with them on putting these exercises out and training people, and then going back another time and training those same people who are successful at the classes how to teach the classes.
So they have agency. They have agency in their own creative expression, in the way they show up and what they can share. And when they're heard, that gives you so much confidence, right? And so it empowers you to know that you're okay. And I think that often that doesn't happen. Yeah.
Well, also when I teach, I created exercises that go around the symptoms of each illness, like schizophrenia, bipolar. And so I give the exercise to the person who has that disorder. And what it does is it helps them to understand how they're thinking. You know, they understand the thinking of schizophrenia. So therefore, they're not so scared of the I hate to say illness, the condition that they have. You know, I do that too. That's how I created the exercises.
Yeah, it sounds like you do a really incredible job of allowing people a free space to reconnect to themselves. And that's everything, allowing them to be heard and seen and validated, and let them know that also they're not alone, which is, you know, unfortunately that doesn't happen as often as we'd like it to. So just know that you're appreciated, Linda. Susan, you serve as a co-chair of One Mind's Music and the Brain Initiative. In what ways does music play a role in the prevention and treatment of severe mental illnesses, mental conditions?
So about a year ago, maybe a little longer than a year ago, Brandon Staglin asked if I would be interested, along with Eric Nestler, to think more deeply about how music was showing up for 5 different severe mental illness diagnoses. One was schizophrenia. The other was major depressive disorder, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. And we decided that we would do a scoping review to really look at what had been studied over the last 10 years in that work around music. And we, our first search delivered over 12,000 studies. We were able to call that down to several hundred studies and really look deeply at what disciplines were involved, what type of clinicians were involved, how people showed up, whether they were individual sessions or group sessions, whether they were listening to music or holding, or whether they were making music, how these things were studied. And we found a couple of things that we thought were really interesting. One is that music appears to be consistently a positive result across all domains with virtually no adverse effects. That's pretty extraordinary when you think of an intervention that virtually has no adverse effects. We also saw that there were really interesting high quality values around the self empowerment, mood change, a sense of well-being, depending upon what groups we were looking at. Music is a very complex intervention, and it uses at least 10 different parts of the brain. It interconnects the brain, and there are a lot of moving parts around that. So we're really interested in sort of taking a deeper look at how personalized music can be helpful in some of these different major mental illness diagnoses, and how we can think about programs and pilots that can stand up some of the translational research that we know, whether depending upon environment. I really like that Linda works in the community. We think there's something really important about working in the clinic, but also moving that to community. So it's been a really fascinating program. We also saw that there are gaps in the research, and there are opportunities to better understand different disorders, also different approaches, and different ways that we are measuring what success looks like for music. So it's been a really remarkable program.
Wow, it sounds like it's touching a lot of lives. So I'm grateful just to listen to you speak about it. And I think it's raising a lot of awareness for those that are listening in as well. So thank you. Guest reminder, especially, we're talking today about art's remarkable power to heal with Susan Magsamen, founder and executive director of the International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, teacher and interdisciplinary artist Linda Sibio. Viewers, don't forget, we want to hear from you. So feel free to post questions for our guests in the comments. Let us know if the visual or performing arts have ever helped you get through any tough times. What does listening to music do for you? And have you created art yourself this year? If you know anyone who can benefit from the information provided by our guests today, please share this webcast with them. So, Linda, current projects, what are you working on right now?
Well, I'm working on the Cracked Eggs project. I'm working on the Cracked Eggs project, which I mentioned. That's a big job, getting it set up. But once it's set up, it'll just be teaching the classes and everything. So I'm excited about that. And I'll be doing 4 sets of 12-week sessions. The sessions end in a big public and community performance and visual art and writing collaboration. And then I'm working on a show of my own called Economics of Suffering Part 4. It's a series I've been doing for a number of years on wealth disparity and how people who are oppressed, such as mentally challenged people, people who don't have money for food, the lower class, how that affects them psychologically, how this oppression affects people in a psychological way. And so I'm making 11 8-foot by 4-foot paintings. I'm building 3 sculptures that kind of move around the gallery. And it has a soundtrack that's very emotional and strange, how I say. So
sorry.
Go ahead. I just say that keeps me pretty busy.
I was just going to mention that for those who are listening and for those who don't know, what is the Cracked Eggs Project?
The Cracked Eggs Project, well, I did a thing called Cracked Eggs from 2001 through 2008 through the California Arts Council. And it was kind of me researching my ideas about insanity in art. And I started a group called the Cracked Eggs, and we collaborated together on pieces, large pieces. We had classes every day, every weekend for 8 years. And I learned a lot by doing that, and the students just grew. They became stars. They were written up in newspapers. And there's one girl, when she was interviewed, said, we might be a little bit cracked, but we're still pretty good at eggs. so, they had humor. Another guy, when he was interviewed, they said, are you schizophrenic? He says, well, perhaps neo-schizo. So they got to talk about their illness in a public way and be respected for their art. And we took it into Los Angeles once, and it was a major thing in their lives, And so then a friend of mine, Andrea Zittel, I was talking to her about the project, and she says, you should go back to the county and ask for funding. So I did. I went and gave like a 3-minute speech in front of the county commissioners. And I said I thought they should fund the project. And so the lady who was there who decides that was the Department of Innovation. She came out to my home, and my husband had made this amazing film of our last piece. And she watched it and she loved everything about it. And so I was all set up because I had written lesson plans because I was trying to get hired at Patton State Hospital to do the program. And of course, they turned me down. But then the county just fell in love with the project. And they got a huge grant, to do it. So we're contracting. My company, Berserk Productions, contracting with the county on a collaboration. And they're doing evaluations and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, I'm excited for you. I can't wait to see what happens next. Susan, your lab has recently announced a new initiative, the NeuroArts Blueprint. How does NeuroArts differ from neuroaesthetics?
So NeuroArts is really shorthand for neuroaesthetics. And we coined that term because we and others really felt that, this term neuroaesthetics is pretty daunting. And what we really want to do is bring all stakeholders in. So we want to make sure that community arts people, cultural arts organizations, artists and practitioners who are doing stuff in really interesting ways feel like they are part of this community where you're bringing arts together for health and well-being. And you don't have to be a brain surgeon to be in neuroarts. You don't have to be a neuroscientist. You don't have to be a social worker. You can be an artist or someone who loves art, who knows and believes that it's really important for others to experience that work, or for you to experience it yourself, whether you're making it or beholding it. And so we really wanted to sort of make this whole field more accessible. The NeuroArts Blueprint itself is a project that we launched together with the Aspen Institute. The Aspen's Health, Medicine, and Society group, a woman named Ruth Katz, who is a public health really luminary, we came together about a year ago, wanting to really think about how you could coalesce this field, how you could bring all these different pieces together so that you could weave a piece of fabric where the arts for health and well-being were in essence everywhere. So all the places that Linda's talking about and all the places where we know youth need more arts in their lives as tool for different issues, or where seniors or older folks need it to help with healthy aging, or where it's needed for veterans and active military, where PTSD or traumatic brain injury has really caused great damage to them and their families. And so anywhere you look, there's a place for arts in service of humanity. And the NeuroArts Blueprint is really about creating a plan, a roadmap, if you will, to be able to help us build that. So we've analyzed research, we've looked at practice very deeply across the world, and we're now also looking at the economics of this. So what happens when you honor the arts? What does that mean for reducing stigma and helping under-resourced communities who really, I think if COVID has shown us anything, is it's been a spotlight on how under-resourced communities have gotten hit so hard because of health inequities, racial injustice, the inability to have access, just basic access to fundamentals like food and clean water and nowadays I would say internet, to be able to connect to the world. So the blueprint's really focused on trying to create some short-term wins, but also a long-term plan to be able to make the arts a thing and around health and well-being, and also in thinking about how it may help us with learning. So I'm also really excited about it. It's sort of an audacious project. Our lab is working on it, but many, many, many people around the country and around the world are part of it. And we really feel like we're building a community. So it's great.
Oh my goodness, I'm getting like secondhand excited from you. So that sounds amazing. And finally, for our last question today, the vaccine news, and this is for both of you, the vaccine news we're seeing offers the most promising hope for some return to normalcy in 2021. What words of hope do you have for viewers about what that might mean for a post-pandemic arts world?
Well, I think the arts have gone and are still going towards social justice issues as a fine art. Many major granting organizations and foundations are giving grants, for people working in social justice, which is the same as mental challenges or any kind of oppressive thing in society. So I think the art world is going in that direction.
I totally agree with that completely. I think that we have needed the arts like we need sleep and food and exercise during the pandemic. And I think we sort of blocked off the need for art as we've become so transactional in the world. But in fact, the arts are transcendence. They soothe our souls. They make us stronger. And I think where maybe before the pandemic, and this is maybe a silver lining, in my work, we had to convince people that the arts were a have to have, not a nice to have. And now I think people are getting it. I've been on some amazing calls where people have just told their stories about how the arts have made them feel better. And I think post-pandemic, we'll carry that forward with the sense of what humanity really is and what we need, and the sense of vulnerability. We're also vulnerable and so afraid. And we are, there's a lot of uncertainty. But I totally agree with what Linda said, which is the arts are about justice and they are about voice. And in any way, lens, frame, you build that, I think, and it happens in so many different ways, whether it's spoken word or a child wearing a banner or someone making a hat. If we can really look at art as message, as communication to each other, and not judge a book by its cover, but really go deeper to understand, what people need and want and feel, and be curious about that, and much less judgmental. I think that'll be a blessing of the pandemic.
Absolutely. You guys, this was wonderful. I have learned so much from you two. Thank you so much for tuning in with me and for speaking with me. I think those that are viewing and listening will appreciate this just as much as I did. So you're appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. It was really amazing to even be able to reflect and think and hear what Linda's doing and Happy's doing. It's really been wonderful.
Yeah, I'd just like to say one thing to you, Susan, is if there's any way I can be of assistance to your project, let me know.
I would love that. I'm going to get your email because I'd love to learn more about your work too. It's really quite extraordinary. So thank you this is just such a great introduction. Thank you.
Look at this. And to the viewers, thank you too. You can post questions on onemind.org/brainwaves. For more on Johns Hopkins' groundbreaking work, visit the International Arts and Mind Lab website at artsandmindlab.org. They've created a COVID-19 field guide with suggestions for ways the arts can help us during the pandemic, including easy-to-do activities. Happy holidays, everyone.
My mother has had depression most of her life. My uncle committed suicide when he was in his 30s.
I live with bipolar.
Now, more than ever, it's the world's leading cause of disability. Yet research to improve mental health lacks the attention physical health research receives. Visit onemind.org. From the lab to the front lines, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.